So the L is available on the Kindle, which is what I'm reading from. I'd like to thank Building 92 first for inviting me to read here as part of the Brooklyn Book Festival, and this is one of the early events, and it culminates in this wonderful event down at Brooklyn Borough Hall on Sunday. I think that is the main event. And I'd also like to thank Eileen Chamard for arranging this, and for all of you for making the pilgrimage down here. It is not an easy place to reach, but it's pretty unique. And what a beautiful setting. My great-grandfather, Michael Archangel Sirigliano, worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard from the 1920s through the 1940s. So it's personally really meaningful for me to be here. And this is a unique opportunity for me to read a chapter from my novel, The L, called At the Navy Yard, actually at the Navy Yard. So that's pretty wild. And you will see in the book, Papa, a character that was inspired by my great-grandfather, takes his grandson Tiger with him to work at the Navy Yard in 1936. And Papa is a foreman on the USS Brooklyn, and they're actually building this ship at that time. And most of you have read the book, so thank you for coming. And so now prepare to step back in time to the Brooklyn Navy Yard in its heyday. This is from chapter 15, called At the Navy Yard. Papa drove toward the Brooklyn Navy Yard with big, sweeping movements, his hands grasping the steering wheel like a captain piloting a ship. The Nash's ride was smooth as churned butter as it hugged the streets and sailed across the cobblestones and trolley tracks. It was one heck of a car. Mind if I take the long way, Papa wondered? It's more picturesque. In truth, Tiger didn't mind anything Papa did. His decisions always seemed to be the right ones, in everyone's best interest. On 8th Avenue, they passed the 14th Street Armory, with its doughboy statue piercing the air with a trusty bayonet. Papa had once told him that the building's cornerstone came from the battlefields of Gettysburg, and Tiger remembered this every time they passed the foreboding fortress. He pictured Uncle John's face as the doughboy as they scoured the French battlefields long before Tiger was born. From 8th Avenue, Papa made his way up the hill of Union Street and turned onto the Grand Army Plaza Circle. Prospect Park stood to its right, all green with promise. But today, it wasn't time to play, but to work. To Tiger, the Grand Army Plaza arch was even more glorious than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France, to which it was often compared and in fact modeled after. Although he'd seen the latter in picture books, Brooklyn's arch was that much more grand because it stood practically in his own backyard. Its official name was the Sailors and Soldiers Memorial Arch, but no one ever called it that, for that tagline was quite a mouthful, especially for fast-talking Brooklynites. To most, it was simply the arch. It was built in 1892 and honored Union troops of the Civil War. See it, Papa asked. Tiger knew exactly what his grandfather was referring to. Papa drove slowly enough so Tiger could scan the vast sculptures, among the largest in the borough. He quickly picked out the soldier who held a pair of binoculars, a new invention in the 1860s. Several soldiers, Tiger noted, were colored. The arch was a busy, bustling masterpiece. It was true. However, Tiger did not share his grandfather's enthusiasm about the binoculars. Now, Tiger liked army men as much as the next guy, but his favorite part of the arch was the winged angel blowing her trumpet at the top. If you looked hard enough, you could almost make out her tiny bronze nipples through the wind-rippled robe. Papa veered onto Vanderbilt Avenue. Tiger could see the spire of the Williamsburg Savings Bank Tower to the left, rising high above all else. They passed rows of brownstones with old carriage houses sandwiched between them. After Bishop Lachlan came Queen of All Saints, church and school, with its carvings of judgmental holy folk scowling upon the sidewalk below. Tiger thought these saints looked even scarier than Lon Chaney, but for some reason he loved looking at them. These holy folk were almost life-size, looming one story above street level and soiled with decades of grime. Good Catholics could identify each and every one by their saintly accessories. Tiger picked out St. Patrick's funny peaked cap, John the Baptist's stone staff, St. Francis's rock-tied robe, and the Virgin Mary, looking somewhat disappointed that she was now living in Kings County. On Myrtle Avenue, the old liquor store sign on the corner store announced its wares in two directions, as though the proprietors wanted to make sure the drunks saw it coming and going. Vanderbilt continued downhill to the waterfront. The Brooklyn Navy Yard spanned across hundreds of acres, and there were several gates, both for cars and for foot traffic, since many of the workers lived nearby in Fort Greene and could walk to work. However, Papa, for some reason, preferred sailing down Park Avenue and using the Cumberland Street entrance. That's the approach he and Tiger took this day. No matter how many times his grandfather brought him to the Navy Yard, the boy's heart grew both full and light at the same time when he laid eyes upon the place. To Tiger, the Brooklyn Navy Yard's big, wide, high Cumberland gate seemed like the porthole to heaven, or something like it. Now, despite the Cumberland Gate's vague resemblance to the threshold of a mechanical heaven, St. Peter didn't helm it, but a kindly older gentleman named Horatio. Horatio looked official and ominous, and that is, until he smiled. Then all ceremony and seriousness faded away. Tiger thought about it, when Tiger thought about it, everyone seemed to smile at Papa, especially when he was navigating the gleaming Nash. The Cumberland Gate wasn't pearly or golden, but was colossal just the same, industrial and somewhat ominous as well. Beyond this entrance, the Navy Yard was alive, a busy, bustling sub-city, an entity unto itself. Papa knew everything about the place. He'd spent most of his adult life working here, and he passed most of this knowledge on to Tiger, who sucked it up like an eager sponge. As far as the boy was concerned, his own father had nothing much to give him, no supreme scepter of wisdom to hand down like a birthright. What could Tony possibly teach him? How to open a beer bottle with his teeth? How to bully, shove, bruise, and otherwise instill terror? How to open and close train doors? But Papa could and did offer Tiger something real, something tangible, something that mattered. A man of simple means, Papa didn't have much to give him in the way of worldly goods, but he gave the child something which couldn't be bartered or bought. He gave him pieces of himself. Most kids Tiger's age didn't know or care about such things as the intricacies of shipbuilding, but Tiger did. He cared and he remembered. The official name of Papa's workplace was the New York Naval Shipyard, but few referred to it as that. Most called it the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Within its walled-in boundaries, there were almost 5 miles of paved streets, 4 dry docks ranging from 326 to 700 feet long, 2 steel shipyards, shipways, plus 6 pontoons and floats for salvage work. Though Tiger had tried to do so several times, there were too many buildings to count. Barracks, a power plant, foundries, a large radio station, a small hospital, and machine shops. See, this didn't happen in 1936. There was even a railroad spur. But Tiger didn't want to think of anything that might remind him of his father. Not today. Papa's official title was shipwright. His union book proclaimed that he was a journeyman and a member of the International Association of Machinists. But Tiger thought Papa pretty much ran the place. Most often he worked outdoors, confidently but politely giving orders. As foreman, he sometimes supervised a gang of men whose job it was to install guns onto the ships, including foundations and guardrails. Sometimes Papa worked indoors in one of the barn-like machine shops, making templates of complex shapes so the ironworkers could do their welding. However, he was happiest outside, especially on fine June days like this one. Sure, there had been lean years at the Navy Yard, what with pay cuts, time cuts and all, but things were looking up. Just last year, the Thomas Bill restored the wages of federal defense government workers like Papa. He celebrated by purchasing the Nash. Without a word, he just went to the showroom one afternoon, picked out Betsy, and drove her home. Life's too short, he explained to his wife Bridget as he rolled up in front of the house. And she agreed, getting in to take a spin, still in her house dress and apron. It rides as smooth as silk, she told him. By the second week in April this year, Papa and his men were back to 40-hour work weeks, but were paid for 48. Their sick leave and vacation days were also restored. It was a heck of a lot better than the TWU, but then again the Machinists' Union had been around for decades, instead of just a couple of years. As disarmament treaties unraveled around the world, and both Japan and Germany began to misbehave, the Navy Yard was reborn. Back in 1933, the Public Works Administration declared that 32 warships would be built over the next 3 years, and were to be divided between private and public shipyards. The Vincent-Trammell Act would create the largest peacetime navy in American history. It took forever for approvals, red tape, and whatnot, but between 1934 and 1936, the Navy Yard's workforce doubled. One of the busiest shipyards on the eastern seaboard, the Brooklyn Navy Yard got its fair share of the pie. When his daughter Rosanna was about 16, Papa helped build the Arizona, the New Mexico, and a slew of other battleships. Now he was busy at work on the USS Brooklyn. History had a habit of repeating itself, and his grandson Tiger was part of it this time. Tiger knew he wasn't nearly as important as a shipwright or a yard rigger. Still, the boy made his contribution. Mainly, he did whatever Papa asked of him, whether it was retrieving a bucket full of bolts from the machine shop, picking up a set of blueprints from the draftsman's building, fetching binoculars or a fresh grease pencil. No matter what his task, Tiger did it cheerfully and quickly, for he belonged to something tangible and vital. Every part served its purpose, Papa liked to say, and Tiger imagined himself a small but significant piece of the pie. Although he had witnessed it before, Tiger also always marveled at the transformation in his grandfather when he changed from street clothes to work clothes. Papa wasn't as neatly pressed and particular as he usually was. In his no-nonsense, dingy jumpsuit and newsboy cap. Even his manner was different. Though never impolite, Papa became a fellow of few words, all business. But Tiger understood this completely. In the Navy Yard, when they were working together, Papa was no longer his grandfather, but Mike, master machinist, gang boss, someone most experienced at general work, as his union book stated. The sheer size of the USS Brooklyn amazed Tiger, and the cruiser wasn't even among the largest ships they built here. While it would be 10,000 tons at completion, battleships could go to 45,000 tons or better. The Brooklyn was still laid up in the dry dock, but it had changed drastically from the last time Tiger had seen it. Back then, it reminded him of a huge skeleton with a mammoth exposed spine. It hadn't even remotely resembled a sea vessel. But now the steel bones were covered with a skin of more steel, and it was slowly taking shape. Its bow and massive sides were being fit together like an enormous puzzle. The workers balanced on narrow walkways, hammered flooring into place, and scurried up wooden ladders like a team of kinetic insects. And Papa presided over his portion of the kingdom like a kindly drone. Old as he was, and Tiger wasn't really sure how old his grandfather was, Papa still got right in there with the boys. He was no stranger to a blowtorch or to any of the other tools. He knew a blueprint inside out and upside down. The manner in which he viewed his work, the way he explained tasks to men clearly and concisely, never talking down to them, filled Tiger with pride. And he was proud to be associated with him, even if just by bloodline. Somehow it made Tiger feel worthy, too. Although the cruiser's flooring had been bolted in securely, Tiger still walked it gingerly, bringing cup and water from one man to the other. He kept thinking of the Brooklyn's exposed bow and raw hull the year before, and how fragile it had seemed. To a young boy of 10, it's difficult to trust in the concept that out of absence, out of nothingness, such solid matter could be built. Tiger felt so tiny scurrying across the surface, even smaller than when his father hollered at him, more minute than when he didn't know the answer in class. Only this was different. This was a different sort of smallness. It was the sense of being a minuscule cog amid vastness. But even little cogs were important. That's what Papa always told him anyway. When even the smallest bolt is wrong, the whole thing is wrong, his grandfather liked to say. The day had grown quickly hot, and it wasn't yet 9 in the morning. The sun was visible above the Fort Greene rooftops, the rows of graceful Victorians, so different than the Navy Yard's no-nonsense brick boxes and metal warehouses. The men thanked Tiger as he offered them cool water from the bucket. No one refused him, although they were accustomed to the heat. Most came from climates much hotter than this, in places where it never snowed. Their dark skin gleamed with perspiration, some the color of an eggplant, and others as pale as tea with milk. Papa handpicked the men in his gang for their hard work and dedication, and everyone wanted Papa as a foreman because of his fairness and his appreciation. They worked extra hard for him because he didn't work them as hard as some bosses. He gave them breaks when they needed them, and always, at the end of the shift, said, "Thank you," looking straight into their eyes and truly meaning it. Papa asked about their families, remembered names of their wives and children, and inquired about the health of ailing relatives. He was a true gentleman and a fair boss. Tiger was making the rounds with the bucket, which he'd filled for the 3rd time. He took a moment to consider the cranes, like those, at least a dozen of them, hovering above various parts of the Navy Yard. They looked to him like the bones of dinosaurs, with long bodies and spindly legs, so tall and oddly delicate, they seemed ready to topple, yet were solidly mounted to tracks. Like great beasts, they moved back and forth, sliding slowly along the rails, suspending a network of hooks and wires, which moved about hunks of steel and set them in place almost soundlessly. It was a clear day, and Tiger could see far into Manhattan, beyond the Williamsburg Bridge, with the wedding cake spire of the Woolworth Building, and the graceful gold figure on top of the Federal Building. It was so cloudless that Tiger could almost make out the lines of the golden creature's face. Further up the skyline was his favorite building, the Empire State Building. It stood almost directly across from the dry dock where they worked. Only 5 years old, Tiger admired its firm lines, so straight and strong and ballsy. He now liked it much better than the frilly Woolworth Building, his previous favorite. Plus, the Empire State Building had starred in its own movie. How many buildings could boast that? Papa had taken Tiger to see King Kong the first week it had come out, and a lilting, thickly accented voice disturbed Tiger's reverie. "I've heard of sleeping on the job, but daydreaming?" Instead of being embarrassed, Tiger smiled. "Sorry, Manny," he said, and approached a small, muscular, dark man with his dipper and bucket. "A fellow could die of thirst," Manny grimaced back at the boy. He took the tin cup, filled it, gulped the cool contents, and then took another. "How's my favorite Gunga Din?" Manny inquired. Tiger was still impressed that Emmanuel Ortez Vega was familiar with the Kipling poem and could quote it even. And the boy still remembered the response Manny had given him all those months ago. "What, you don't think we can read back in Panama? You think all yard workers are illiterate savages? With a grandfather such as yours, could you possibly think this? Now Tiger knew better. Manny could dress down a coworker in at least 4 languages, although he was much more gentle with women and children. Since their initial encounter, Gunga Din had become Manny's pet name for Tiger, a boy who was no stranger to nicknames. "I'm fine, Manny," Tiger answered. "Et tu?" "Muy bien, gracias," Manny responded. "Your pronunciation is getting much better." One of Tiger's goals in life was to speak as many languages as his grandfather, but no one knew his aspiration except Manny, who was helping him achieve this quest, word by word. Tiger and Manny were very fond of each other. Manny saw in the boy a spindly but spunky child reminiscent of himself. The wounded eyes, the drunken father, yes, men in the Navy Yard, like men in most places, gossiped like washerwomen. The determined spirit, and in Manny, Tiger saw an adult who did not treat him like a boy. Tiger longed to have muscles that glowed, though his would not be the color of Brooklyn dirt like Manny's were. He longed to do a job that was important as well as dangerous. Manny was one of Papa's best workers, and the men had a mutual respect for each other that was never spoken, but simply understood. Similarly, instead of vocalizing their affection, Manny and Tiger danced the dance of bravado and macho, like bucks clashing antlers, like goats crashing horns. They constantly tested each other. Instead of saying, "You're a good boy who will get through this tough time," Manny demanded of Tiger, "Name 3 battleships built here." And instead of telling Manny, "I value your friendship," Tiger told him the Maine, the Connecticut, and the Tennessee, and Robert Fulton's steam frigate, the Fulton, which was launched in 1815. Manny nodded thoughtfully. "Lucky guess, you just named 3 states," but before Manny could finish, Tiger put down the bucket and counted off on his fingers. The Maine, 6,682 tons, launched in 1890. The Connecticut, 16,000 tons, launched in 1904. The Tennessee, 32,000 tons, launched in 1919. "Ah, your grandfather taught you well," Manny conceded. "And what about this place? How old is it?" "Commissioned in 1801. "And how big?" "Approximately 260 acres, Tiger told him. Manny wiped his glistening brow. "Bueno." Tiger was on a roll now. "And did you know that it's built on the site of Peter Cesar Alberti's tobacco plantation? He was the first Italian to arrive in Brooklyn." "And certainly not the last," Manny laughed. He patted the boy on the back, feeling the knobs of his spine. Manny returned to work, and Tiger moved on to the next thirsty soul. It was a busy day for Tiger, as most were at the Navy Yard, retrieving tools, delivering work orders, sweeping up the machinist shop. Before he knew it, lunchtime rolled around. Papa was feeling particularly magnanimous that day. Before the lunch whistle blew, he gave Tiger a crisp bill and told him to take the bicycle they used for errands to the Frankfurter wagon that was right outside the gate. Tiger managed to fit a plank of wood between the handlebars and ferried 40 hot dogs safely back to dry dock number 3. He also suspended 2 paper shopping sacks of Coca-Cola from the handlebars, the bottles clinking with each pump of the bicycle pedals. The men let out whoops of joy when Tiger returned with his wondrous booty, and Papa announced that lunch was being served in the main dining room. The workers thanked him profusely, shaking his hand, clapping him on the shoulder. Papa told Tiger to keep the change, even though he tried to give it back, twice. The hot dog vendor, stationed outside the Cumberland Gate, was elated at his good fortune, and the immigrant men gladly set aside their lunch pails of savory pigeon peas and rice, warm potato latkes wrapped in newspaper, now spotted with grease, or sandwiches made from sausages left over from Sunday's gravy. Perhaps they would give these uneaten lunches to someone else more fortunate, or maybe they would eat them after quitting time. It was a day of good fortune for everyone. Papa's Navy Yard crew sat on the deck of the Brooklyn, enjoying their meal in pairs and small groups. Someone had devised a way to open the soft drink bottles on the edge of the diamond plate stainless steel decking. Now this flooring had several uses. A good number of the men, Papa included, had fashioned bracelets from unused strips of this scrap metal, like the one I'm wearing, and etched them with circles and swirls, soldered in patterns of delicate flowers, and bent the metal to fit the wrist of a wife, mother, daughter, or granddaughter. The stainless steel resembled sterling silver, but shone more brightly and never tarnished. And this afternoon, the ship's flooring also served as a gigantic picnic bench of sorts, pleasantly radiating the heat of the sun. Manny sat on the deck beside Papa and Tiger. The boy tried to follow the conversation, which flicked back and forth between English and Spanish with a smattering of Italian, which Manny also spoke. Manny's Italian was peppered with a Spanish accent, and Papa's Spanish flecked with delicately Italian-accented Brooklynese around the edges. Lying back on the cruiser's warm deck, Tiger closed his eyes, his belly full of frankfurters and icy Coke, and listened to the words swirling above his head. He must have dozed, because the next time he opened his eyes, Manny and Papa were smiling at him, and he heard the music of hammers against metal in the distance. For a moment, he'd forgotten where he was, but even half asleep, Tiger knew that he was far from the L, and that he was safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. That was so great, and I think that, you know, we chose this spot for even a more like the best reason of all. I just was kind of realizing that it really is Dry Dock 3. You really can see the Empire State Building right there. We couldn't see it over there, but you can see it from the vantage point. It's just amazing. And on your way out tonight, when you're going out for Building 92, if you'll notice, there's a huge solar screen on the building, and it's the projection of the launching of the USS Brooklyn in 1936. Does anyone have any questions for Kathy at all?
Yeah, I do. So much I know it's fiction. Much of it sounds factual. So where's the line?
It's a slippery slope and a blurred line, I guess you would say. I tried to be historically correct. A lot of the characters were inspired by people in my family, and I have a Facebook page that has a lot of pictures of some of these people. So it was a lot of family lore that I heard growing up, and I just kind of went with it, and just took the story and ran with it. So it's hard to say where one ends and one begins.
Tell me about this bracelet.
There's also a beautiful display inside that has bracelets that, and when I wrote this, I was under the mistaken information that my great-grandfather actually made this, but there was a man who made bracelets and sold them to people. I maybe sold them or maybe gave them, we don't know. I contacted the man who donated the bracelets for the display, and he was under the impression that his grandfather just made them for people in the family. But I have a whole bunch of family members who have them with their initials carved into them, so they took scrap metal and they just made these beautiful bracelets out of them. And they never tarnish, and they're pretty cool.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I know, it's amazing. I thought it was like gold. I noticed it.
Yeah, no, that would be great. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Please come back to Building 92. Building 92 is open to the public Wednesday to Sunday, 12 to 6. We are free, and we're really excited to share our story and our resources